Hey guys, you're listening to Actually English, the podcast that takes real English from the real world and breaks it down so it actually makes sense. Made for intermediate to advanced speakers who want to learn everything that the textbooks don't teach. I'm your host, Jenna. Let's get started. Hey guys, welcome back. How are you? Thank you for joining me for another episode of Actually English. Today we are going to talk about and break down a short TED Talk called How Languages Shape the Way We Think. Now, this talk is given by Lera Boroditsky, who is a cognitive scientist and professor. She wrote a book on this topic as well, which I would like to purchase and read. I'll let you guys know if it's any good after I read it. I'm sure it's fantastic. To me, this topic is really interesting. I hope you guys love it. Let me know what you think. I want to start off with this question. Can you guess how many languages there are in the world? Don't look it up, just guess. How many languages are there in the world? 7,000. 7,000. 7,000. That is a ton. Now, Laura starts off this talk with a quote by Charlemagne. It says, "To have a second language is to have a second soul." And those of you who speak 2 or more languages, I think you know exactly what that means. Let's get into it. Now, the essential question that is asked in this talk is, does the language we speak shape the way we think? Now, if you watch this talk, if you listen to it, you would know that the answer is absolutely yes, it absolutely does. Here are the speaker's favorite examples. Her and her team studied an Aboriginal community from Australia. Okay, this Aboriginal community is called the Kuktire. And in this community, they don't use directions like left or right. Those don't exist to them. Okay, think about that. They don't have directions left or right. They only use cardinal directions, such as north, east, south, and west. Now, let's break that down a little bit. Do you know what an Aboriginal community is? Well, it's a community of the original inhabitants who have lived on the continent for over 60,000 years. Okay, the original people from that community. And I told you guys that the Kuktire community only uses cardinal directions. Do you know what those are? Those are the directions on a compass: north, east, south, and west. Do you guys know where east is right now? If you do, good job. The Kuktire always knows exactly where they are. So they are very well oriented. They know where they are at all times. They could tell you with their eyes closed in their sleep where northeast is. In the US, we use these cardinal directions. Obviously, not as much as the Kuktire, but of course, we do say things like in 2 blocks, go north, or yeah, I live about 10 miles south of here. In Mexico, they don't use the cardinal directions as much. They typically tend to orient themselves based on landmarks, meaning things you can see: shops, houses, fountains, trees, things like that. And they also use the verbs go up and go down the street. We use those verbs in English, but to me, that just means to continue. It doesn't have any real meaning. It just means to continue, right? But in Mexico, in Spanish, they use the verbs literally go up and go down the street. And that means they're referring to the direction that the river flows or used to flow, right? Going up is going against the river, And going down is going in the same direction the river flows. So they're typically very oriented in terms of if the street is going up or down, or if they are going up the street or down the street. Now, because of this, sometimes people tell me to go up the street a few blocks, but I don't know which direction is up. So I typically have to ask them left or right or north or south, because I'm not always aware of which way is up. Sometimes it's obvious because there is an obvious inclination in the road. You can see if it's up or down. Then, okay, I know, up or down. But not always. Sometimes the people who live here, they know exactly which way is up and down, even though to me, it's not so obvious. Laura continues her speech by saying Russian speakers have different words that they must use for colors. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that a color that in English, we might refer to it as the same color, but different shades, right? Like blue can have different shades of light blue or dark blue, but in Russian, they are completely different colors, like the difference between white and black, or the difference between orange and blue. They don't see them as different shades. They are completely different colors. So, in a cognitive test with Russian speakers, they were much quicker to identify the difference between a light blue and a dark blue, because to them, they are completely different colors. And this reminds me that in German, they have so many different ways to describe beer, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that beer is a pretty fundamental part of the German culture. So they have lots of beer, and they have many years of experience describing these beers. So maybe in English, we might have, say, 20 words to describe a beer. They might have 100 words, adjectives, to describe beers. Now, in English, we might describe a beer using an entire sentence or multiple sentences to correctly categorize the flavor, texture, or color. And maybe that entire paragraph that we used to describe the beer is just one word in German. So they have so many words to describe beer. I thought that was interesting. Another thing that Laura mentions in her talk is grammatical gender. In Spanish, the word bridge is masculine, but in German, it's feminine. So when speakers of these languages are asked to use words to describe a bridge, well, German speakers are much more likely to use words like beautiful or elegant, which are typically feminine words. And Spanish speakers are more inclined to use words like strong or long, which could be considered masculine words. I have a question for you. Does the language that you speak assign a gender to their nouns? Now, obviously, English does not, even though some words just naturally feel feminine, right? And some naturally feel masculine. For example, butterfly feels a little bit feminine, even though caterpillar, which is a butterfly before it's a butterfly, feels masculine. And flowers feel feminine, but trees feel masculine. And this is probably because of cultural associations, but I digress. Now, let me be clear that this is just my own opinion and how I see words. I do think that most people would agree with me that butterfly feels feminine and flowers feel feminine, but let me be clear that in English, we do not assign gender to inanimate objects, okay? And actually, this is why I hear a lot of English students refer to inanimate objects, meaning objects that do not move, that are not alive, as he or she, when they should use the word it or they, because maybe in their language, a towel is feminine, but in English, it's an inanimate object, so it does not have a gender. So we use the word it or they if it's multiple. Now let me tell you something though. It is acceptable to use he or she with animals if you know their gender, okay? If I see a dog in the street and I don't know its gender, I might refer to it as it. I might just make up a gender, call it he or she, or I would call the animal they. I would refer to them as they. And honestly, that's a whole nother episode. If you guys want an episode on pronouns, well, let me know because we can absolutely do that. Something else that's really interesting that Laura mentions is the grammatical structure and how it's different between languages. For example, in English, we tend to put blame on the person, while in Spanish, things just often happen or happen by themselves, right? In English, it's okay to say things like, I burnt the bread, or I got into a car accident. Neither one of these phrases are really taking the blame. You don't know whose fault the car accident was, even though you say, I got into an accident. You have to ask what happened to know whose fault it was. It's totally acceptable to say, hey, you dropped your phone. It is usually an accident. It doesn't mean that, hey, you threw your phone on the ground on purpose. Even though you're saying you dropped it, you did this, it is understood that it was an accident, okay? But in English, it's okay to say, I forgot. Oh my God, I forgot about the meeting. I'm so sorry. Yes, there is a little bit of blame on the person, but not a lot. Like in English, at least, forgetting something is an accident. Just like burning the bread is an accident, or I broke my arm. I did not physically grab my arm and snap it like a tree branch or something. It was an accident. Okay, but in English, if you want to remove the blame completely, you can use something that we call the passive voice. They use this a lot in the news. Instead of saying somebody or the robber robbed the bank, they say the bank was robbed. And now you don't even have to say who, because they don't know who yet. They're just giving you news that something happened, not that somebody did something, okay? So passive voice examples, the bank was robbed. The bread was burnt. The cup was broken. The person was fired, okay? These are all examples of the passive voice to completely take away the blame. And Laura leaves us with a really interesting fact and something to think about, some food for thought. She says that most of these linguistic studies are done by American English-speaking undergraduates at university. Okay, so there is a huge lack of diversity in these studies. Let's break that down. What is an undergraduate? She says that these studies are done by undergraduates. Well, an undergraduate is a student in a university who is working towards a bachelor's degree, which that usually is a 4-year degree. So somebody who is still working toward their first degree. And she says that there is very little diversity in these studies. What is diversity? You have diversity when you have many people from different communities, backgrounds, races, etc. Okay? And there is very little diversity in these studies. So obviously, this affects the outcome of the study. I want to leave you guys with this question. Imagine how different a study like this would be if this study had been done by somebody or people from the Aboriginal group, by an Aboriginal group. For example, the Cook Tire. Imagine if they had done a study like this and they studied English speakers. Imagine how different they see the world, how the outcomes would have been different for a study like this. Well, if you made it to the end of this episode, congratulations, and thank you so much for sticking with me through the whole episode. It means so much to me, honestly. And if you can do me a favor and share this episode with one person who is learning English, it means so much. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Actually English Podcast. And we have a website now. So the website is itsactuallyenglish.com. And there you can find more information on our English classes that we're going to be starting in April. Thanks again for listening. Keep learning, stay safe, and I will talk to you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.